that means you're in essence saying I'm going to a suburb or something like that. So you guys know Detroit has interesting racial politics. It was once a haven for all these different ethnic groups, but then as World War II came along and African Americans began to come in big numbers because of World War II and the fact that the defense industry turned into, or excuse me, the auto industry turned into the defense industry with the New Deal and us trying to make sure that we got out of the war. So all these jobs opened up in Detroit and huge numbers of African Americans. It's called the second Great Migration. The first Great Migration is the 1910s to about the Depression. Then we have a lull in the movement of black folk until the beginnings of World War II. The second Great Migration is key to places like Detroit, but also keys to places like San Francisco, San Diego, and Los Angeles. Prior to that, there were not a huge number of black people who lived in California because it had not had slavery, had not had this huge influx of folks. But after or during World War II, when people were going to work in the defense industries, when people were going to work in San Diego around naval stuff, they're going to El Segundo to work in the airplane. They're going to Oakland because it's Kaiser shipyards and the Henry J. Kaiser is building ships there and paying folks real dollars. And they're coming to an interesting place called Fontana, California, because also Henry J. Kaiser created a steel mill, which was going to be the engine that pushed the war machine on the West Coast. So same type of thing you have here in Detroit. So you're going to have huge numbers of people coming into it. And at the same time, you're going to have some of the older groups decide to say to themselves, I don't want to be around these people. And move, in this case, right outside of the city limits, create all kinds of suburban communities, and huge parts of the tax base will go then to the suburbs and the center. For the first 30, 40, 50 years, it's not a problem because the center of Detroit is still these major auto manufacturers. But you guys know in the late 1970s, everything began to change. It wasn't because of technology or innovation, it was because of outsourcing. The US companies decided that they could make the same things in different countries, they could get cheaper labor, and then just assemble them in the United States. So like the Ford F-150, I think of the total number of parts, like 80% of them are produced in some other part of the world. They're just put together here, okay? And the notion of them being an American car is because they're assembled here, all right? So we're on 8 Mile, and once again, we're getting the 8 Mile. 8 Mile, of course, the movie, you guys like 8 Mile and stuff, but 8 Mile is the separation point. Inside 8 Mile, Detroit. Outside 8 Mile, suburbs. So it's a bunch of different cities. Bloomfield, what's the one? Where the Lions used to play? And Pontiac, Michigan. All these other places that are outside of the city. As you also know, for a time period, even the sports teams were going outside of the city. So the Pistons didn't play in the city. The Lions didn't play in the city. And you can imagine that's even that revenue gone from the city. Now they've all come back. You know, it's a 25-year anniversary of like Ford Field and some other things like that. But it's been a process. Ford, I mean, as we talked about before, Detroit is a place where the biggest city in America to go bankrupt. And when it happened, it lost like 60% of its people. For all the people who already had a skill, they could go to Ohio, they could go to Michigan, other parts of Michigan, they could go to other places. But for the other people who didn't have a defined skill, but simply lived off the fact that there was so much going on here, so I work at a supermarket, right? Because there's so much going on here. I work at a liquor store, I work at all these other places. When those core workers are gone, that then takes the bottom out for all the kind of low-wage workers because there's nothing else going on. And they were just left here. And I would say from the mid-1980s until about 2010, you could see it, and you still see it in places. You're going to see blighted areas. You're going to see just kind of crazy when you're like, how is that going on here? Total block, and I don't mean one block. I mean miles and miles and miles and miles and miles of vacant homes. Anybody's ever been to St. Louis? If you ever go to St. Louis, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Like that hurricane hit St. Louis a little while ago, and everybody's like, oh, the streets are... That's how St. Louis looks all the time. Okay? No, and it's depopulated. There are 150 contiguous blocks in St. Louis in the city without occupants. 150 contiguous blocks. Detroit is even bigger than St. Louis, and it was that way. I remember when I used to teach, I used to tell my students, just 15 years ago, we'd go on Zillow, and I'd say, I know a place where you can buy a house for $1. And people are like, no, Dr. Walker, there's not a place. There would be thousands of houses in Detroit sold for $1. Thousands. Because They had become in disrepair. They really just want somebody to take it over and get a certificate of occupancy, which means you brought it back up to code. And if you could do that, it would help the city tremendously. But they went for years and years and years and years and years with nobody even picking that stuff up. When you guys went to downtown Detroit, you know what happened to change downtown Detroit? His name is one person. His name is Dan Gilbert. He owns Rocket Mortgage and the Cleveland Cavaliers. He went to Wayne State University. You guys, so we've been in Detroit. Wayne State is not, it's not like California where there's fence around the school and everything else. You're just in the middle of Detroit, and that's the School of Law for Wayne State. You're in the middle of Detroit, that right there is the medical school. You're in the middle of Detroit. So he had gone to, Dan Gilbert was a Detroit person. He went to Wayne State. And when he saw so much going on with the, you know, the negativity of Detroit, he decided that he was going to move Rocket Mortgage to Detroit. He moves Rocket Mortgage here, and that means he was bringing something like 7,500 employees. In the city of Detroit, in the middle, in downtown, you guys see all them big buildings you saw? Those buildings were going for $1 also. The skyscrapers, everything. We used to come here, it was a ghost town. Dan Gilbert bought up like 400 of them for $1 a piece. Came and put his employees there. You get where I'm coming from? So now we at least got 7,000 people who need a house. A loft, you know what I mean? 7,000 people who need education. 7,000 people may support, their family support a private school. And then he began to make more initiatives like that. At first, I remember I had gotten a job offer here to work at Wayne State, and this was, you know, early 2000s. And I remember like a 2,000 square foot loft downtown, totally new, renovated, was going for $75,000. And I was just like, I mean, fully renovated, all stuff. They're much more expensive now, but it was Dan Gilbert. Dan Gilbert owns something like 90% of downtown. So you guys ever see the movie It's a Wonderful Life? So there's a guy named Mr. Potter in It's a Wonderful Life. And they called the city after a while Pottersville because people call downtown Detroit Gilbertville. Because Dan Gilbert owns everything there. But he took the risk. You know what I mean? Nobody else would take the risk. And then sooner or later, another corporation comes back. The hotel that we were at the Renaissance Center, that Marriott, I've been here where the Marriott was totally closed down. And all the hotels were all closed down. Pontchartrain Hotel, the Hyatt was closed down, all that stuff. And it has been changed in the last 15, 20 years because, once again, that initiative and things just moving forward. So Detroit is a city that's on the come up. It has, you know, really, and you can really see it now happening where there's more vibrancy and everything else. Now, as he's going to talk to people also about the issue of the difference once you get outside of 8 Mile, and outside of 8 Mile, you can get a big shopping center. Outside of 8 Mile, you'll get a more quality school. Outside of 8 Mile, you get all these other things. And inside of 8 Mile sometimes just isn't that way. So, once again, 8 Mile defines for Detroiters the end of Detroit. Okay? So, even when Eminem does it, you know, when he talks about 8 Mile, because it's the notion of which one is he in. Is he on one side or is he on the other side? He's white, he's got some other privileges and everything else, but it's also 8 Mile. That's all the context of here, and that's why the movie is supposed to have that grid, because that's the tension. Are you in the city or are you outside the city? We are going to a place that is very interesting. It's just a park, but there's a specific wall that we want you to see. And Jamon's going to tell a story about that wall, and I'll leave it to that about the story that he's going to tell about the wall. But it's an interesting story about racial segregation and the notion of Detroit and precedents that are set, long-standing precedents that'll be set because of certain specific policies that'll happen, that'll systematically disenfranchise not just people in Detroit, but a huge number of other people, especially of African descent, through certain federal policies. So, yes.